and there's some things going around and some people ill. And so anyway, we're very excited that you're here, and we're very excited to have Claudia from the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare with us as well. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We've still got some people coming in on the waiting room, from the waiting room, and it might be kind of interesting since we're a small group today, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat where you're from and like what organization you're from, or maybe even what part of the state you're from.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there's only a few of us, so I think it'll be intimate. We are recording it, but be kind of nice to know. I know a few of you who've joined. There's Tony. Tony is our project director from Illuminate Colorado, who is responsible for implementing Circle of Parents around the state.
Good to see you, Tony. And welcome everybody else.
Okay, so it looks like the waiting room is slowed down. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker and the topic. And just first of all, again, welcome if you've just joined. We're excited you're here. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, maybe you're just where you're coming from, what organization, or even what part of the state. Feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation if you have a question, or if you want us to back up on something, or if you're Claudia says something that resonates with you. I think it's always kind of engaging to kind of hear what your reactions are to the content. So again, feel free to use the chat. And we're a small group today too. So welcome. You're welcome to also take yourself off of mute. We can have a conversation about something. So we'll kind of keep it a little bit casual and informal. So the topic today is implementing a family-centered approach for families affected by substance abuse disorders and involved with the child welfare system. And this topic really dovetails nicely with the COPE project, which is part of the funding for these Lunch and Learn webinars. So COPE is a Circle of Parents expansion project in Colorado. The grantee was the Colorado Judicial Department. They've partnered up with Illuminate Colorado for implementing a peer-to-peer support group model called Circle of Parents. Many of you have that those groups in your local area, and I'll put in the chat, or Claudia from my team will put in the chat how to get more information. And it might dovetail nicely with what Claudia is going to present today as well. So we're really excited. One of the partners on the COPE grant is the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. And so we've been fortunate to partner up with them for our presenter today. She's also been involved with some of the COPE project calls, and so she knows a little bit about how we're modeled in Colorado. So we welcome Claudia Alvarez Valper, currently a program manager and senior program associate with the National Center and Family Futures. She manages tasks and deliverables for 34 current grantees under the RPG, which is what COPE is. So lots of experience in this area. She's got a master's of social work from the University of Southern California and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, Los Angeles. So lots of experience and lots of depth in this area. So again, we're a small group today, so feel free to put in questions in the chat, or take yourself off of mute, and happy to have that, more casual and, dialogue amongst each other. So welcome to Claudia, and thank you again for being here today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Maureen. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to rejoin you back. I've been on a couple of other calls before, and share a little bit about what we've learned across our work with the National Center and the regional partnership grants. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of the lessons and apply it to some of the ongoing work that you all are currently doing in Colorado. So why don't we go ahead and get started. This is just a quick reminder that this presentation is supported by joint funding from the Children's Bureau, Administration for Children and Families, and SAMHSA. So before we get started, I'd like to start with a brief moment to get our attention focused and ready for today's training. I see this as an opportunity to create space for a mini break in our busy day. I realize that you're all probably jumping from call to call. And so hopefully this will help transition us from the last thing we were doing onto this current call. This will not take long. It's not mandatory. And if you don't feel like taking part in this mindful moment, that's okay. You can sit quietly during this short exercise. Please close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, or you can keep your eyes open and have a soft gaze downward. Bring attention to how you are sitting and find a way to be relaxed and alert at the same time. Bring attention to your breath and notice how you're breathing. If you'd like, take some deeper, slower breaths. Let's give ourselves permission to let go of our busy day and become present together. So I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds, let you all really settle in. Now to end this time, you can invite a bit of movement back into your body. Perhaps move your hands and feet or stretch if you'd like. If you have your eyes closed, you can slowly open them when you're ready. Thank you all for participating in this exercise. I hope this was a welcome break and you feel more present and focused and ready to come together as a group. Let's briefly review today's learning objectives. My hope is that after our call, you'll be able to learn about the essential ingredients to successfully implement a family-centered approach. Familiarize yourselves with practical strategies, lessons, and considerations, and gain an understanding of the collaborative efforts and policy-level activities needed to implement and sustain a family-centered approach. I'd like to begin our discussion today by talking about what family means. How systems, programs, and agencies define family has wide variation. Families are diverse and can be made up of nuclear family members, extended families, non-blood relatives, or friends that become family. Families come together in all kinds of unique ways. What makes someone family cannot be defined by DNA or even legal status. Family is about the unique bond and the support that exists between people and that ultimately creates a sense of belonging. A sense of belonging is a basic and necessary human need. We know that cultural identity affects family membership and makeup. Different cultures and belief systems influence definitions, and because cultures and beliefs change over time, definitions of family are by no means static. A family-centered approach recognizes and accepts the individual person's definition of family. A critical first step in implementing a family-centered approach is establishing a clear definition of family and articulating that not only for the families you serve, but also for your collaborative partners. Before I continue with the PowerPoint, I'm going to take a couple of minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to launch a brief poll. I kind of just want to get a feel for where you all are in terms of defining family. So give me a minute while I drop in the poll. And for those of you that are available and can participate, please go ahead and fill this in. And I may actually pull up the results just to see how people are responding to this. So give me 1 second. I have to move my screen because I can't see. Give me 1 second. There it is.
I'm sorry, could you help me see where the poll is at?
Yes. So if you click on the link that I just dropped, you should be able to participate. Actually, I may need to launch it because I don't think I've launched it. So give me 1 second as I try to.
I see it. It should be.
Okay, perfect. So
did that
the
answer your question?
Sure.
I wasn't sure who asked the question, but can you see the chat box? Okay.
Well,
yep, got it. Thank you.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay. I see folks participating. Well, I see one. The question is, has your agency established a clear definition of family? So if you can, go to that link in the chat and you can answer. The options are yes, no, and unsure. Unsure, okay. I see some folks participating. Let me share my screen so y'all can see that. I'll give folks a couple more minutes before I move on to the next slide here. All right. Perfect. And it could be that some of these definitions have been established and maybe they just haven't been shared across the agency just yet, right? So a follow-up question for you all is, what are some considerations your agency should take into account when defining family? I see some folks have started dropping in some suggestions, including legal definitions, policies and procedures, how our families are talking about their definition of family. That's a good one. I feel like we're very open to any definition of family. Culture, absolutely. People's cultures definitely play a large role in how you define family. So for those of you who participate, how families define themselves, yep. Inclusivity, that is a very broad term, it is, yep. Which is why it's very important to be able to, narrow down what you as an agency that you are currently working with defines family as. So great, for those of you who participated, I appreciate that. Maybe it gives you some food for thought about some next steps. And maybe that's an activity that you all can take back to your agency and really sit with and think about how to continue defining family. Can you guys see my screen again? I am back to the defining. Perfect. All right. So back to our presentation. A family-centered approach extends well beyond the substance use disorder treatment, child welfare, court, and mental health services systems, and includes all other agencies and individuals that interact with and serve families. It's important to be very intentional about the use of language. At the National Center, we use the phrase family-centered treatment when we talk about treatment specifically, but whenever possible, we use family-centered approach to be more encompassing of all systems. The work of all community partners must reflect an understanding and responsiveness to the fact that parents and children live within the context of a larger family system, and that families exist within the context of their community and culture. The cultural influences of race, ethnicity, religion, geography, and customs are considerations that must be prioritized when implementing a family-centered approach. A family-centered approach is often a paradigm shift from business as usual. Identifying the family as a system requires a shift in thinking for service providers who have traditionally focused on the identified client. What we know is that child safety and parental recovery are critically linked to one another and must be addressed holistically to ensure the best outcomes for the entire family. There's currently no universally accepted definition of a family-centered approach or specific model. As a result, each treatment agency or service provider may operationalize the family-centered approach differently. Differences in practice may reflect regional variations, the needs of different populations, or availability of services. We created this graphic to represent the components of a family-centered approach. Despite differences in definition, there are a set of common essential ingredients to a family-centered approach that are used across the continuum of providers. These ingredients are collaborative partnerships, and really we see collaborative partnerships as that root, that base, adequate and flexible funding, performance monitoring, intensive and coordinated case management, high quality substance use disorder treatment, and comprehensive service array. We'll talk more about these essential ingredients later on in the presentation. Parents and children live within the context of their larger family system, and families exist within the context of their community and culture. Meeting the complex needs of each family member thus requires collaborative partnerships and a comprehensive continuum of care. An array of services is necessary to be able to respond to the needs of all family members. Family-centered support services often include family strengthening services and programs, evidence-based parent-child programs in education, culturally responsive and gender-specific services, individual and family therapy, children's services, recovery supports, high-quality early education programs, housing, legal aid, transportation. This is by no means a comprehensive list of services that families and communities may need. But this list really is meant to demonstrate the need for cross-systems collaboration, public-private partnerships, and resource development. The needs of families are often wide, and no single agency can really meet their needs. The following graphic outlines a continuum of family-centered treatment on which SUD treatment programs can exist. The process of integrating a family-centered treatment approaches into traditional SUD treatment takes time. And as a result, SUD treatment providers can be at different points along this continuum during this process. Family-centered treatment addresses the effects of substance use disorders on every family member. This treatment approach focuses on the needs and welfare of children within the context of their families and communities. Family-centered practices recognizes the strengths of family relationships and builds on these strengths to achieve optimal outcomes. The left-hand side of the continuum recognizes that at a minimum, family-based services acknowledge the influence and importance of family, provide for family involvement, and address family issues on individual treatment plans. The most comprehensive model of family treatment is the family-centered treatment model, in which each family member has an individual treatment plan and receives individual and family services. Most programs exist somewhere along this continuum, but very few meet the standards for a family-centered as defined by the right-hand side on this chart, fully family-centered. While we want programs to move to being fully family-centered, we know that it is complicated by funding, policies, and many other roadblocks. It's important to note that this isn't all or nothing. Every step you all can take toward a fully family-centered approach is a step in the right direction for families. Earlier, we talked about the essential ingredients of a family-centered approach. When implementing a family-centered approach, we can look at each of these ingredients and how they fit into the structure of existing services. Collaborative partnerships, the first three, collaborative partnerships, adequate and flexible funding, and performance monitoring are activities and practices that align with governance structures of organizations. The next three, intensive and coordinated case management and high-quality treatment services and comprehensive service arrays, are the clinical practices that align with a family-centered approach. Although we've addressed this previously, it can't be stated enough. Collaborative partnerships are at the foundation of the FCA approach. No single entity or agency can meet the needs of the entire family alone, and it really takes a team to do this work. I previously outlined the essential ingredients of a family-centered approach. Next, I'll share key strategies that have been successful. In the same way that service plans are designed following a comprehensive assessment of the family, conducting a community needs assessment to establish strengths and gaps in the continuum of care is an important beginning step in developing a comprehensive service array. Through lessons from many providers across the country, we know that co-located staff is a highly effective way to build strong cross-systems partnerships. Family practitioners agree that an upfront investment of time and energy in forming strong collaborations pays off in the long term. Efforts to promote community involvement is also an important investment. The addition of peer support specialists in the continuum of care for family has proven to be highly successful for engaging families early in the process and helping to address barriers. I know you all are doing a lot of really great work in that arena with peers as well. So that's always really exciting to hear all of the breadth of knowledge that you all bring to the table from your experience and expertise. Funding is often the barrier that most providers find the most difficult to address. Adequate and flexible funding is required for the implementation and sustainability of an FCA approach. Unfortunately, traditional funding structures typically do not support a comprehensive family-centered approach. This slide identifies some of the funding lessons that can be applied in efforts to implement and sustain an FCA approach. Although grant money and demonstration projects are not long-term funding solutions, they are incredibly helpful in launching the family-centered approach. And I think you guys are doing a really great job with some of that through the RPG program. Engaging state partners at the very beginning of planning is also a key strategy for success with funding efforts. By involving state partners and aligning project objectives with state and federal initiatives, partnerships are strengthened and the likelihood of sustainability is increased. Family-centered practitioners consistently emphasize the need to diversify funding. Funding sources are often siloed and restrictive. Accessing many different funding sources and collaborative partners is necessary to meet the complex needs of families. Marketing. The ability to demonstrate the impact and value of family-centered treatment to improve family and community outcomes is important to make the case for sustained funding. In your marketing approaches, definitely take into account your data collections, your local evaluation findings, really be able to tell the story behind the data. And we can't emphasize this enough, but marketing begins at day one. As soon as you begin your work, you really should be reaching out to local stakeholders, community partners, and sharing and disseminating findings as early as possible, even if it is just sharing stories of successful program completion. Building and sustaining a family-centered approach requires monitoring family success in treatment. Performance monitoring is a tool family-centered practitioners can use to establish high-quality services and can be used to track outcomes, helping to answer questions such as how are families doing? How do we know? It can also help identify gaps in services and strengthen the services being provided. Monitoring fidelity of evidence-based practices is a key ingredient, making sure that services are following the model. Performance monitoring can help engage current partners and gather buy-in from reluctant partners. We cannot overemphasize using, again, your data for continuous quality improvement and to tell your story. Develop your elevator speeches, identify champions, get as much buy-in towards your program as early as possible. And you can do that by your performance monitoring, by looking at your data, looking at your outcomes. Intensive and coordinated case management ensures that partners can address the multiple and complex needs of adults, children, and multi-generational households affected by SUDs. Family practitioners that we have interviewed have identified fundamental principles, priorities, and goals of intensive and coordinated case management. Some of these are making sure that a family is defined by the person seeking services, comprehensive family screening and assessments, comprehensive services to address the complex needs of families. Honoring the role of parents ensures that children's and families' needs are met and fosters treatment engagement. Making sure the family is an equal partner in case management, planning, and identification of priorities. One of the other key ingredients we have identified in a family-centered approach is high-quality substance use disorder treatment. SAMHSA has identified 5 elements to quality treatment: accreditation, medication, evidence-based practices, family-centered, and recovery supports. Family approach practitioners implementing the family-centered approach have expanded on these elements to include a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive approach, timely access to SUD services, gender-specific treatment, the inclusion of children in treatment, and providing ongoing training for treatment staff. Thoroughly assessing families' needs and providing them access to comprehensive service array of services that meet those needs is an integral part of family-centered treatment. The service array may look different depending on who the program serves. Again, looking at your target population, are you located in a residential treatment program? Are you providing home-based intensive services? And also where services are being provided, right? Services are going to look very differently in a rural versus an urban location. So taking all of those things into consideration when you're developing and looking at your comprehensive service array is very important. Family-centered practitioners have leveraged their collaborative partnerships to create a continuum of care and provide services that might not otherwise be available through their program. Example of these critical services are shown on these slides. It's important to note that staff require training and ongoing education and support to build and maintain culturally responsive services that meet the unique needs of each family and contribute to a system of care that serves all families in the community. A multi-generational approach to providing services to families affected by SUDs and involved with the child welfare system is beneficial to the family in the current time, and it is critical to breaking cycles that have often been in place for many years. So this particular table I find fascinating. Some of the work with the RPGs really have expanded their service array, right? Thinking outside the box, looking at families' needs. How do we get families to services? Who can we tap into in our community that can help provide us with some transportation? Just to name a few. This slide highlights select positive outcomes of family-centered treatment approaches. These are just a few of the examples of many positive outcomes that we know exist across the country. There's a growing body of research that demonstrates the effectiveness of family-centered treatment in improving child, parent, and family outcomes, including increased treatment retention rates and reduced substance use rates, decreased risk of child abuse, reduced rates of infants with prenatal substance exposure, improved psychosocial and family functioning for children, parents, and family members, improved child developmental and behavioral outcomes. These are just some of the positive outcomes that we've seen from agencies that have implemented a family-centered approach. We know that this isn't easy work. Transitioning traditional services to a family-centered approach requires collaboration between key state and local partners and commitment to review and potentially redirect available resources. Collaboration among state and local agencies requires leadership, clearly specified tasks, and agreements on what results can be achieved with a specified level of resources allocated across agencies. It's also important to note that transitioning to a family-centered approach can be done incrementally rather than, again, being viewed as an all or nothing. State and local policy members have a critical role in making decisions about the scale, meaning the number of those served compared to the need, and scope, the breadth and type of services delivered, of family-centered treatment services. Finding a champion that can help direct, guide, and/or influence this process increases the likelihood of success. While the goal may be to change all traditional treatment to family-centered treatment across the system, new practices can be implemented on a smaller scale as a starting point. For example, a treatment agency can work with the local child welfare agency to begin providing family-centered treatment to a group of shared clients, or begin sharing information and coordinating services for the adults and children in the family. State and local leadership efforts needed to ensure the implementation and sustainability of a family-centered approach include priority setting. To move forward with implementing or expanding a family-centered approach, policy members and collaborative partners agree to make it a priority. Priorities respond to the needs of the clients with specific characteristics such as foster care status, prenatal exposure, single parenting, or trauma history. Priorities also take geography into account. recognizing the special needs of dense urban areas as well as those of rural and tribal populations. Previously, we discussed community needs assessment to identify gaps and strengths in the continuum of services. Community mapping is a tool that has been very useful in this process. In addition to community needs assessments, a funding inventory is also an important step in determining what resources are available or could be redirected to support a family-centered approach. Collaborative teams start with developing an inventory of all available funding sources to understand available and upcoming funding. As you all enter, I believe, year 3 of your RPG grant, I cannot overemphasize how important it is for you all to start thinking about sustainability and funding and engaging in some of these practices to just be able to understand, where is funding going to be coming from? What parts of your RPG do you intend to sustain, and what is it going to take to sustain those specific practices that you've outlined? Back to data. I can't stress the importance of data collection and evaluation. Collaborative teams should prioritize reviewing available data on a regular basis and using this information to make adjustments in service approaches to assess for cultural appropriateness and support ongoing funding. The task of developing consensus among collaborative partners on how to measure progress against baselines requires data sharing and evaluation system across agencies. Performance monitoring enables partners to answer critical questions such as what's working and for what clients. In the absence of a shared data and evaluation system, partners should work towards sharing data that is easily available. Who pays for it? The exact cost of implementing a family-centered approach is difficult to quantify. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and as we have previously established, the actual service array is going to be unique to each community. We know that traditional funding structures typically don't support a comprehensive family-centered approach. Collaborative teams can start with developing an inventory of all available funding sources to understand available and upcoming funding. In order to answer the question of who pays for a family-centered approach, or actually who will pay for a family-centered approach in the future, we recommend that you take a couple of steps, including building and sustaining state and local interagency collaboration and system linkages, understanding interagency collaborative funding and cost-sharing avenues, building understanding amongst stakeholders about existing and potential services, resources, and supports, improving capacities of coexisting systems to streamline or realign resources to serve all families, reducing the fragmentation, duplication, and gaps in services, supports, and resources commonly occurring across family-serving entities. And finally, identify opportunities to improve a system's overall performance by, for example, strengthening weak connections or filling gaps in the system. Community mapping is a helpful tool to not only identify strengths and gaps in services, but also in funding. Community mapping can address both micro and macro approach to this work. At the macro level, it can help coordinate the who to avoid duplication, asking questions such as, are we intentionally collaborating with in the pursuit of funding versus, or are we competing for resources and referrals? Making sure that the right families are receiving services. Through the National Center, we've helped a couple of RPG grantees conduct some of these community mappings. And so if that's something that you're all interested in doing, we can certainly provide you with some of our resources or just some of the information that we have in terms of community mapping. I see a chat. Yes, Maureen, if you've got any questions, definitely chime in, let us know. Understanding the landscape of funding options can guide selection of those services that may be critical first step toward comprehensive family-centered treatment programs. I am not a fan of this particular slide. It's a lot to digest, but I think it does a really good it really gives us a good understanding of all the different funding sources outside of grants that we oftentimes don't necessarily think about, right? Funding available to support family treatment can be drawn from both federal treatment funding streams and the wider network of allied services from other public and private sources. Some of the types of federal and state programs include entitlement programs, formula block grants, discretionary grants, direct payments. Thinking outside of the box, traditional versus non-traditional funding streams. Unusual stakeholders like libraries can often provide supports by sharing facilities for meetings, etc. Kind of thinking outside of the box where you may not normally have thought about. FCA is an approach or framework, not a program. As programs move to a family-centered approach, the hope is to keep moving to achieving systems change. Just as people do not exist in isolation, systems also intersect in their work to serve families. Historically, systems have distinct missions and target populations, and as a result, families must interact with various agencies to get their needs met. This system of agencies, when working together, can positively affect outcomes for families through relationship building, data sharing, cross-training, and resource pooling. When siloed, these agencies miss the opportunity to provide a cohesive, evidence-based response to the multifaceted challenges families face in our communities. Over 13 years of RPG lessons have shown that long-term sustainability successes are largely based on the program's work to establish collaborative goals, outcomes, and indicators. Partners who work together across systems to identify shared goals often had the most success in sustaining some or all aspects of their RPG programs, moving from individual projects to real systems change. Again, this isn't easy work and it doesn't happen overnight. This is years worth of work, right? So how? Providers at the state and local levels that are seeking resources for family-centered approach will need to negotiate with external agencies and organizations. Sometimes state agencies can lead this process, while in other cases, local agencies will need to negotiate with each other in the process that may take time and patience. Some examples of strategies that have proven effective in negotiations for shared implementation and sustainability of a family-centered approach across agencies include clarifying how many children and families on the caseloads of providers may now or in the future be clients of other agencies, seeking state legislation that establishes a priority or presumptive eligibility for children whose parents are in treatment. Working with community-based agencies such as family resource centers play important roles in providing staffing for recovery supports and advocacy. Some of these strategies may be more appropriate than others. Tailoring approaches to external agencies' needs and goals is a critical task in negotiating for the resources needed. And before we jump into the take action and next steps, I'm going to launch another brief poll for those of you that are still on that I haven't lost yet. Give me 1 second while I pull this up. So I shared a lot of information with you all, probably a lot to digest, but if you could participate in that poll. And I will bring up my screen shortly. Okay, the question is, which of the FCA essential ingredients would you like to learn more about? Intensive and coordinated case management, okay, comprehensive service array, and adequate and flexible funding. Definitely something for us to think about. I will take this back to Mary and see if there's any additional support we can give you around intensive and coordinated case management. That's a really good one. I can pause here for questions if anybody has them.
Yeah, I was thinking about if people had questions or if anyone's, feels comfortable saying they feel like in their local communities that they're doing this well, or that they're doing some of this already. Or if there's anyone saying kind of in the local area where we haven't really started. Like, I was kind of curious where in the journey folks think that their local communities are.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So I feel like, I've been facilitating my Jefferson County group for, like 8 years now. And I feel like, COVID really had a damper on the relationships that I had worked so hard to build. And like, I'm in the process now of rebuilding those relationships. And so just so you know, Claudia, I am the program manager for Circle of Parents, but I also still facilitate 4 groups. And I can say that in my journey to really have buy-in from different community peoples, right? Like we have recovery court, we have our family integrated treatment court. We have, because I previously worked as a peer in Jefferson County, that helped to build a lot of the relationships as well. And we get our space donated to us through a church. And I think that one of the biggest things that we really are still needing kind of the support with is food. Because we have group at night, and food is one of those barriers for people attending that come at night. I have been partnering with CASAs along with some DU law students to come in and volunteer their time to provide our children's circle. So I feel like there's a lot of really good collaboration going on there that other groups could potentially learn from. Just as far as all the collaborations go. And I can get parents to do potlucks and different things like that. But I think that one of really the ongoing things for some groups out there, including mine, would be being able to feed the families. In my current budget, I have food, or I have it that so that I can buy the groceries, and I actually prepare the food for the families to come eat. We have use of the church's kitchen as well as several different meeting rooms and a nursery. And I don't know that a lot of other folks out there for the RPG groups or any other groups for that matter, especially the ones that are fairly newer, have had that opportunity to necessarily go and partner with all the different people. We have been talking about, so pre-COVID, we had probation that came in on the same night, and they provided a seeking safety group for their women that were in their probation, and they're talking about coming back in the church. And so I'm going to be having a conversation with them about, yay, let's share this space. And we're going to have to come together to, for all of us to pay for food, because it's not in my budget to pay to be able to feed everyone. And how can you also, if your moms are going to be needing to utilize my childcare, how can we partner? Can you get other probation officers to come in, or your partners to come in to be able to provide some of that childcare, because we do meet weekly.
Yep.
And I do see that with other groups that sometimes the childcare can be a barrier. But like I said, it really is a lot of times the food, because we need to be able to feed families, and food brings people together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. My head, putting my TA hat immediately as soon as you mentioned food, right? There's a couple of RPG grantees that they've implemented the Strengthening Families program. And I want to say one of the components of the Strengthening Families program is bringing families together around food. And so RPGs have addressed this issue about how to provide food to families during during group sessions. So I can certainly put you in touch with a couple of grantees who are implementing that EBP, just to kind of get a feel for what they've done. But I can also go back to something that I shared during the presentation, which is community mapping. It would take a lot of work. I realize that community mapping is not an easy thing to embark on. It's, it requires resources, it requires staff, it requires somebody who's got the time and the ability, who's familiar with the community, to really be able to kind of look at what resources are available. Are there food banks available that you could tap into? Tony being the sole cook for providing services is not sustainable. And it's tiring and it creates burnout. And that's, it's a great short-term solution to a larger long-term problem. And so I would highly suggest, I can definitely, put you in contact with some of our RPGs who've done this before, because there's a few. But I would highly encourage you to embark on some level of community mapping if you can, because I think it'll really give you a better understanding of what resources are available in your community. There's folks out there who probably have food pantries and they may just be sitting on it and not know who to partner with. Are there local schools who have culinary programs who might be interested in coming and cooking once a week for you? It takes a burden off of Tony, and it really, hopefully creates some sustainable ways to keep this afloat long after, either the RPG program ends or Tony moves on to something else. Just thinking about how to sustain this, because one, you've already realized that it's a need in your community, right? Food deserts, just the need for food. I think even just after COVID has really exemplified how much, our families are in need of this particular resource. And so thinking about how you might be able to contribute that to your community, I think is really helpful. But I will make a note and I will put you in touch with those grantees. But really, if there's anything I can advocate from this particular discussion, is consider doing a community mapping. It doesn't have to be huge. It could just be something as small as, let me look at what food resources are available. It could be as simple as that. You don't have to take the whole service array into account. You could just choose one thing to focus on and see if there's anything that you might be able to maximize on. Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you. And I forgot to mention too that we actually had, a lot of the stuff, like trying to go back to from pre-COVID, all the partnerships that we had and all the different things that we were doing. And one other thing that we were doing is we have in our recovery court, a lot of folks are, they're required to do a restorative justice project. And so as part of that project, the courts have offered to let them come in and help cook and clean the kitchen afterwards. Instead of coming up with this big elaborate project, for them to need to do something as simple as them coming in and donating their time. Okay. I'm also seeing that there is a need for people to be able to do some other community service for them to be able to come in and help with that stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the one thing too that we're starting to notice just across the board as the world moves into going back to the way things were pre-COVID, being able to think back about what other pieces have fallen through the cracks, right? I think you just mentioned a really great example of that, because we've had to turn our attention to putting out fires and keeping our systems afloat, being able to continue to provide services in whatever capacity that looked like during COVID. Now, as things go back to normal and maybe you have a little bit more time back in your day, going back and revisiting some of the work that you were doing pre-COVID and hopefully picking up some of those pieces again. Thanks, Tony. Any other questions or anybody else want to share about where they are in terms of kind of on that continuum of family-centered approach? All right, I think this is it for me then. Maureen, I can turn it over to you if there's any closing remarks you'd like to give.
No, thank you so much for all of the great information. Thank you for letting us record it. We did put a chat in the chat box that has the link to the, it just takes probably 2 or 3 minutes if you could let us know what you think of the trainings, especially if there are ideas during like our presentation today on topics that you would like more information about. That's really helpful for us as we plan out trainings beyond January. And I think Claudia put in the chat, our next training is January 26th at 12. Again, we usually do them over the lunch hour because we have a lot of court staff. And the title of that one is Pressure is Not Stress. And so it'll be a nice kind of reset for the new year, kind of thinking about how to manage stress and pressure at work and yet take care of ourselves. So I personally appreciated the mindful moment, Claudia. It's always nice to even just take a couple of deep breaths. And I think it's a good reminder as we go into this crazy holiday season and we're all juggling work and all the other things that we have to do. So thank you again for the great presentation and content. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. And don't forget to do the survey link for us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you, Claudia's.
Claudia's.